There's a stretch of isolated wilderness nestled deep within the Canadian Rockies, miles from any established trail or human habitation. It's a place of towering jagged peaks and valleys, perpetually shrouded in a cold mist where the silence is so absolute it feels like a physical presence pressing in on the senses. Legends among the few indigenous trappers who dared venture near speak of it as the Whispering Mole, a place where the mountains themselves listen. Hidden within this forgotten expanse lies the ruins of the Blackwood Sanitarium, an experimental psychiatric facility active for only a few short years in the early 1950s. It was designed for radical isolation therapy for patients suffering from extreme sensory processing disorders and paranoid schizophrenia. The sanitarium was abandoned abruptly in 1957 following an unexplained mass disappearance of both patients and staff. The official story cited severe weather and logistical impossibilities, but hushed fragmented reports from the few surviving maintenance workers spoke of a profound, unnatural silence that settled over the facility, of patients who stopped screaming and started listening, and of a chilling rhythmic tapping that seemed to emanate from the very walls, counting down to something unspeakable. Blackwood became a ghost in the mountains, its existence eventually relegated to the realm of obscure, discredited medical journals and chilling urban legends. This story begins with Dr. Alistair Finch, a 39-year-old experimental psychologist and audio forensics specialist from Vancouver. Alistair wasn't a ghost hunter or a thrill seeker. He was a scientist consumed by the nature of perception, the subjective reality of the human mind, and the subtle ways external stimuli could warp or reshape consciousness. Blackwood to him was a perfect horrifying case study. He'd unearthed fragmented patient journals and staff memos, heavily redacted, that hinted at auditory anomalies and shared delusions that escalated beyond any known psychiatric profile. He'd also found a peculiar custom-built soundproofing schematic for Blackwood's sensory deprivation chambers, noting an unprecedented level of acoustic isolation designed not just to block sound, but to create a vacuum, a perfect absolute silence. He believed Blackwood's true horror lay not in what was heard, but in what was unheard. He never intended for his research to become an immersive experiment. He certainly never intended for the silence itself to know his name. But fragments of his journey, his descent into the echo chamber of his own mind, survived, captured on his specialized biometric suit's internal monitors, transcribed from his voice-activated comms, and ultimately retrieved from a meticulously encrypted data chip surgically implanted beneath his own skin, found weeks later miles from his abandoned research vehicle. The first sign that something was irrevocably wrong didn't come from a spectral presence or a sudden chill. It came from the sound itself, or rather the impossible absence of it. Alistair had navigated the treacherous mountain passes and the massifs, dense mist-shrouded forests for days, guided by satellite topography and ancient survey markers. He finally located the Blackwood Sanitarium, a sprawling, dilapidated complex of stone and rusted metal swallowed by the encroaching wilderness. The air hung cold and damp, thick, with a scent of pine and decay. His initial atmospheric readings were normal, but as he neared the facility, his highly sensitive ambient noise meters registered a gradual and rapid drop in decibels. No wind rustled the trees, no distant bird calls, no drip of condensation. Just an unnatural, profound stillness. He spoke into his recorder, his voice low, professional. September 15th, 1000 a.m. location, Blackwood Sanitarium, Canadian Rockies ambient noise levels, dropping precipitously registers below typical environmental background. Approaches absolute silence within 50 meters of the main complex. This is anomalous. Extreme acoustic absorption, consistent with architectural schematics for total sensory deprivation. He paused, annoying unease settling in. The profound quiet pressed in a physical weight on his eardrums. It wasn't just quiet, it was an emptiness of sound and unnerving vacuum. He moved deeper into the complex, his boots crunching unnaturally loud. On gravel, the sound immediately swallowed by the oppressive quiet. He found the main entrance, a massive rusted steel door, a warning etched above it. All noise is illusion. He ventured inside. The interior was a labyrinth of mold-streaked corridors and empty, echoing rooms, but there were no echoes. Every sound. He made a footstep, a breath. The click of his equipment was immediately absorbed, leaving a jarring, abrupt silence in its wake. It was profoundly disorienting. Hours passed under the oppressive lightless sky, filtering through broken windows. The silence grew heavier, more pervasive, accompanied by a subtle, almost inaudible pressure building behind his eyes. He tried to dismiss it as a psychological effect of extreme sensory deprivation. But the sensation persisted, a dull ache that resonated deep within his skull. His biometric suit registered erratic neural activity, localized spikes in his frontal lobe, often associated with processing novel or threatening stimuli, even though there was seemingly nothing. His portable acoustic mapping array, after hours of sweeping the vast empty halls, finally locked on to a major, undeniable anomaly, a series of perfectly sealed, heavily insulated cells deep within the facility's lowest level. These were the sensory deprivation chambers, and from their very core, the pressure intensified to a palpable throb, along with a faint luminous pulse captured by the thermal imaging. Not heat, but light. A deep, impossible indigo, like a bruise on black velvet, but somehow terrifyingly, intrinsically organic. He whispered into his recorder again, his academic detachment fractured by awe and profound dread. The chambers, they're active, emitting a non-thermal luminous pulse, a deep indigo. The silence, it's emanating directly from their core. The pressure. I feel it clearer now. It's like the silence is calling. The patient logs mention the sound that isn't sound. This is it. This is the source. This is what truly swallowed Blackwood. A cold metallic taste filled his mouth, the taste of burgeoning terror. Driven by a dangerous, irresistible combination of scientific imperative and a burgeoning icy fear that chilled him to the core, Alistair located the precise epicenter of the pulsing indigo anomaly. It was a section of the sanitarium's lowest level, a fortified wing encased in layers of lead and specialized acoustic tiling. The air here was utterly still, heavy with a profound, earthy scent, now tinged with a faint cloying sweetness like decaying flowers. The indigo light pulsed from within the walls, a vast subterranean heart, its rhythm a slow, deliberate beat that seemed to synchronize with his own. He found the entrance to the sensory deprivation chambers, a series of massive airtight doors, each thicker than a vault door, designed to block out every conceivable vibration. He manipulated the rusted levers of the primary chamber door. It groaned, a loud grating sound that was immediately horrifyingly swallowed by the unnatural silence as it opened, leaving no echo. He stepped inside. The room was perfectly cubic, padded with a thick, seamless black material that seemed to absorb all light and sound. The Indigo Pulse originated from the center of the floor, where a circular recessed platform was located. This was the core. He moved cautiously across the sound-absorbing floor, his headlamp beam seemingly lost in the absolute blackness, making the space feel infinite. He could hear his own heartbeat, unnaturally loud, echoing only within his own skull. But then other sounds began to intrude, not from outside, but from within his own mind. Faint, fragmented memories, half-formed thoughts, almost whispers of forgotten conversations rising and falling with the Indigo Pulse. It was disconcerting, like his subconscious was being played back to him. He reached the circular platform. The indigo light was brightest here, radiating from a perfectly smooth dark surface, impossibly reflective, yet absorbing. This was the source of the silence, the pulse, and the mental intrusions. He realized with a cold, sickening dread that this wasn't just a chamber. It was an instrument, and it was playing him. As he approached the glowing platform, the mental intrusions intensified dramatically, focusing directly into his mind, bypassing his auditory senses entirely. They were not malicious, not aggressive, but possessive, ancient, a vast, patient consciousness, communicating its intent. You seek solitude, we provide. Be absorbed, be silent. The words were not spoken aloud, but imprinted directly onto his consciousness, terrifyingly clear, undeniable. He felt a profound, aching sense of emptiness within himself, a deep, pervasive void that the entity seemed to be calling to, promising to fill with its light, its resonance, its terrifying unity. Alistair stumbled backward from the glowing platform, the mental invasion overwhelming, an insidious violation of his very being. The entity's mental intrusions, now a relentless internal monologue, promised solace, profound understanding, unity with something vast and ancient, an end to his individual struggles, replacing them with a terrifying, seductive sense of belonging. His specialized biometric suit's sophisticated monitors flashed frantic, alarming warnings, heart rate, dangerously elevated neurological patterns, wildly erratic brainwave activity, showing a disturbing predominance of delta waves, the state typically associated with deep sleep or complete unconsciousness, even though he was wide awake, lucid, and utterly terrified. The entity was actively manipulating his physiology, not with brute force, but with a subtle, terrifying precision, attempting to dismantle his resistance to prepare him for assimilation. He forced himself to regain composure, activating his portable psychoacoustic emitter, a device designed to generate counterfrequencies to disrupt auditory hallucinations. He pointed its emitter directly at the glowing platform. The screen flared with impossible, off-the-charts readings. The platform wasn't just a surface, it was a focal point, a direct conduit to an unimaginably vast living consciousness that permeated the entire subterranean void. The indigo light, he now understood, was its very essence, its conscious awareness, a visible manifestation of its thought. And then the emitter picked up something else, something that made his blood run cold. Within the glowing depths of the platform, thousands of anomalous signatures, irregular yet distinctly patterned, pulsed with the same organic indigo light. They were undeniably biological, and they were undeniably human. The patients, the staff. He gasped into his recorder, a horrified realization dawning with sickening clarity. His voice was a strained whisper, barely audible over the internal thrumming. They didn't just disappear. They were absorbed. Their consciousness, their very minds, integrated into this thing. The missing of Blackwood, they're here. The mental intrusions in his mind intensified further, no longer just sibilant murmurs, but now taking on fragmented, echoing forms of human voices. Not distinct words, but chilling inflections, raw emotions. Terrified pleas for release. A child's desperate, forlorn whisper for its mother. A doctor's frantic, desperate internal monologue, infinitely prolonged. They were the trapped echoes of Blackwood, thousands of individual souls forced into eternal, unwilling chorus with the vast, consuming entity below. As he stared, paralyzed by horror, into the glowing depths of the platform, a single hand slowly, deliberately rose from the dark, reflective surface, perfectly preserved, utterly intact, coated in a shimmering dark material that seemed to absorb all light around it. It pulsed with the entity's internal indigo light, a beacon of unspeakable horror. It was a man's hand, gnarled and frail, his old wedding band still glinting faintly on his finger. It reached out, not threateningly, not with aggression, but with a horrifying, desperate invitation, echoing the insidious whispers in his mind. Come, be silent, be whole, become part of us. The fingers twitched, beckoning him closer, a silent, terrifying command. Alistair stumbled back, repulsed, a guttural cry caught in his throat. He bumped hard against a heavy industrial-grade isolation tank, a relic of the sanitarium's early therapy methods, abandoned and now half submerged in the pervasive dark coating of the chamber. It was massive, its thick, soundproof walls now dull and corroded by time and something else, something alien. This was one of the very tanks where patients had been confined to absolute silence, designed to calm their minds. A desperate, illogical, yet strangely compelling thought formed in his mind. If these tanks had been designed to create perfect silence, could they somehow be used to break it? Or perhaps more violently, to trap the entity's resonance, to disrupt its terrifying, vast harmony? It was a glimmer of defiance against overwhelming odds. The beckoning hand from the platform solidified further, stretching out its glowing fingers, almost touching Alistair's suit. Its palm, as it reached, revealed a faint, intricate, almost pulsing glyph carved into its surface. It wasn't human. It was unmistakably alien, ancient, resonating with a terrifying, unknown power, a symbol of the entity's true cosmic nature. The entire chamber around him began to pulse with a new, stronger energy, a powerful tremor originating from the platform itself. The indigo light intensified momentarily, blinding him, saturating his vision with its unholy glow. The mental intrusions in his mind shifted, no longer a seductive invitation, but a forceful, undeniable command. You will join. You will provide the missing frequency. Your harmony will complete ours. He felt the very air around him begin to tremble with a deep, resonant undulation, not violently, but slowly, inexorably. The entire chamber, the entire sanitarium, seemed to be vibrating, sinking, being drawn deeper into the earth. The entity was not just consuming passively, it was moving its colossal consciousness, shifting, perhaps, attempting to pull him into its very core, into the blinding source of that indigo light where the assimilation would be absolute, irreversible. The air grew impossibly heavy, like breathing through thick, viscous liquid pressing in on his lungs. His eyes darted frantically, desperately searching between the beckoning, horrifying hand on the platform and the immense, silent isolation tank. He spotted a single narrow fissure in the cavern wall, a geological weakness almost imperceptible, a path he hadn't noticed until this desperate moment. It was far too small for him to enter easily, but his compact, autonomous probe, still attached to his utility belt, was slender enough. If he could send it, if it could navigate the fissure and carry a message, a final coherent warning, about what truly lay beneath Blackwood before he was inevitably consumed. He lunged for the heavy industrial-grade isolation, tank his mind a maelstrom of racing thoughts. It was too massive to move, but perhaps he could activate something within its complex machinery. Its core sound-dampening system designed for incredible acoustic nullification was still faintly humming, powered by an internal experimental battery cell miraculously still holding a charge after decades. If he could overload it, create a catastrophic feedback loop, a chaotic burst of anti-sound, it might be enough to disrupt the entity's resonance to create the ultimate cacophony that the redacted patient files had hinted at in Blackwood's final cryptic records. It was a long shot, a desperate, impossible gamble against an ancient, hungry force that dwarfed all human comprehension. The hand from the platform stretched further, its glowing fingers almost touching Alistair's suit, beckoning him into the indigo light. The mental intrusions became a deafening chorus of fragmented human screams, the desperate dying echoes of lies. Blackwood's patients and staff, now part of the entity's horrifying, unending song. He could feel his own consciousness beginning to fray at the edges, the delicate boundaries of his mind, blurring his individual thoughts, merging with the vast collective agony and the alien intelligence that permeated everything. The ancient entity was not just consuming him, it was tasting him, preparing him, savoring him for the final ultimate assimilation. His fear was being replaced by a chilling, seductive resignation. He had to choose: fight and risk being consumed with utter agonizing clarity, or run and perhaps leave a final desperate warning for a world that would never believe him. Alistair's choice was made in a microsecond of pure animalistic terror. He ripped the autonomous probe from his belt, its small indicator light a futile blink in the pervasive indigo glow. With a desperate prayer to a god he no longer believed in, he activated its internal recorder, screaming his findings, his experience, everything he had learned about the entity of Blackwood. This is Alistair Finch, Blackwood Sanitarium. The silence, it's alive. It consumes minds. It's an ancient entity deep within the earth, feeding on consciousness. The patients, the staff, they're integrated. It's a vast, silent intelligence that traps souls in a perpetual echo chamber. It knows me. It's inside my head. It wants my mind. His voice cracked, tears streaming down his face, illuminated by the cold alien light. He hurled the probe towards the narrow fissure, a desperate final attempt to send his warning. The probe spun end over end, its small form swallowed by the darkness of the crack. He didn't know if it would make it out, if its encryption would hold, if anyone would ever find it. But it was all he could do. Then, with a shuddering gasp, he turned back to the immense dormant isolation tank. The beckoning hand from the platform stretched closer, its indigo glow intensifying, the glyph on its palm pulsating. The mental intrusions roared in his mind, a final overwhelming command from the entity's silence. Rest. Be integrated. Your unique frequency will complete our symphony. His consciousness felt like a taut string about to snap. He jammed his suit's power cable into the isolation tank's primary power conduit, bypassing safety protocols. He overloaded the system, sending a catastrophic surge of energy into the tank's acoustic dampeners. The tank groaned, a low metallic shriek that defied the chamber's silence, building into a deafening, localized anti-sound resonance. It wasn't sound, it was the negation of sound, a vacuum, amplified, designed to tear apart all coherent frequencies. The indigo light around the tank flickered violently, convulsing, as if in profound agony. The beckoning hand recoiled sharply, dissolving back into the platform's surface with a liquid-like ripple. The vast, overwhelming mental song of the entity, fractured, dissolving into a discordant chaos of shrieks and discordant notes within his mind. It was like a perfectly tuned instrument suddenly being struck by a million hammers, tearing its internal strings. The entire chamber writhed, the indigo light flaring and dimming like a dying star. The very walls of the massive chamber groaned, deep fissures appearing and propagating across its surface, illuminated by the erratic glow. The omnipresent pressure on his mind, though, still there felt momentarily diminished, a raw, wounded presence. Alistair collapsed, gasping, sweat plastering his hair to his face. The isolation tank buckled, its thick walls groaning and exploding inwards with a deafening implosion that was immediately horrifyingly swallowed by the unnatural silence of the chamber, leaving only the brief searing after image of collapsing metal and a sudden vacuum in the air. He had wounded it. He had created a wound in the silence itself, but the reprieve was fleeting. The entity, though momentarily staggered, was vast, ancient. The indigo light began to pulse with renewed intensity, albeit erratically. The profound, aching silence returned slowly, inexorably, beginning to reassert its terrible dominion. And within it, he felt the entity's anger, cold, ancient, and absolute. It wasn't just a physical space. It was a consciousness, and it was aware of him. He knew. He couldn't escape. The mental intrusion, though brief, had fundamentally altered him. He could feel the latent connection to the entity, a terrifying whisper that would never truly leave him. The silence would always be there now, in the deepest corners of his mind. Blackwood was not just a place. It was a state of being. Alistair lay there, broken in the heart of the echo chamber of solitude, the indigo light slowly, steadily pulsating around him. He could feel the entity beginning to repair its shattered harmony, its immense consciousness already reaching out, touching the edges of his mind, preparing for the final ultimate absorption. He closed his eyes, no longer fighting, merely listening to the silence. It knew his name. It always had. The final entry on his suit's internal comms, retrieved days later when his biometric suit's energy cell finally died, was only a few seconds of static, followed by a single faint rhythmic tapping sound. 1, 2, 3, a slow, deliberate beat echoing from within the impenetrable silence, counting down to something or someone. What unknown depths of consciousness did the Blackwood Sanitarium truly unlock? What horrifying silent symphony does the entity now perpetually conduct with the minds of its assimilated victims? And what unspeakable fate awaits anyone who dares to venture into the echo chamber of solitude, where the silence itself is the predator?